Good afternoon. Welcome to this KIT webinar, Cross-Cultural Values in Corporate Values in a Cross-Cultural Surrounding. We would like to actually tell you a bit more about how you can work with cross-cultural values with your company's cross-cultural values in different parts of the world. Now, I would like to say a bit about myself first. My name is Simone Buijzen. I'm a cross-cultural trainer and coach. I've worked with KIT intercultural professionals for 12 years. And before that, I actually lived in Asia and in Australia. So I worked a lot with local people there. I've done a lot of work all over the world, in Europe, in Asia, and other parts, and a bit in Africa. And I am looking today at how you can implement your corporate values in other parts of the world in a successful way. We would like to first talk a bit about KIT intercultural professionals. But before we do that, I actually would like to know from you, with the poll that we just put out, what is the size of your company? Now, if you would like to answer the poll, please. Yes, 3, 2, 1. Thank you. So actually it's pretty balanced. About 20% is self-employed, 28, and 26. So you're in all different kinds of sizes of businesses. Thank you. We will come back to this later on. Okay, now I would like to say a bit more about the KIT structure, the KIT intercultural professionals. So there are two units to this. We have the knowledge units, which are non-profit, and they actually make sure that there are new ways of working with health and with the prevention of diseases. And of course, there's no money paid for that. And then there's business units. There is real estate down in the beautiful building that is here in the Oosterpark, or near the Oosterpark in Amsterdam. There is a real estate part for the SDG companies that are there, that are actually working, small companies, small startups that are working with SDG goals. Then there is a hospitality part, the restaurant and events. And then there's intercultural professionals. Intercultural professionals focuses on cross-cultural training and coaching, working with teams and with leadership, and also working with people that are newcomers in business and interculturally, as well as people that have done this for a long time. Now, at KIT, we actually work with, not so much with theory, but far more with practical examples to how you actually work with different cultures in everyday life. Now, we would like to start today, or we would like to do 3 steps today. We start with values, then we have corporate values, and then we look at how you can communicate your corporate values cross-culturally. Now, what are values? Values are actually your core, not only for a company, but also for a person. Values actually show why you do things and who you are. So they're very important. It's also important for positioning of a company to use values. Now, does anybody of you know this man, Simon Sinek, and his golden circle? Please answer us in the poll now. Yes, okay, quite a few people know Simon Sinek, but quite a few people don't. Okay, it's actually 50-50. Okay, this Simon Sinek is a marketing expert that is actually working with the Golden Circle, and he actually is working with 3 ideas. Now, there's a what that a company does, a how that a company provides their services, and a why in a company. And he says that the why is the reason why companies do things, and that's the core of a company. And corporate values are the essence, they are the core of the why. So when you actually start a company, you should start with corporate values. That often doesn't happen. In many years past, this didn't happen at all. And now most companies, especially big companies, have corporate values, but they don't always see the value in the corporate values. So if you look at it the way I look at it now, without corporate values, you actually have no positioning. You actually don't say to the outside world who you are. So that's very important in having corporate values. Now, if you look at your own company, are you aware of your company values? Please answer the poll now. 3, 2, 1. Yes. Okay, most of you are aware of your company values. Now, it's very important whether you have a small company, whether you're self-employed, or whether you work in a bigger company, that you actually know about your corporate values. Because your corporate values, in a way, is what you sell in the end. You probably don't sell a product that nobody else sells, so your corporate values are sometimes the difference. So it's very important for everybody to know, especially in the times where we work with sustainability and we work with all kinds with bio products. So it's very important for the outside world to know what your values are. So what are corporate values for? Who are they for? They are actually a positioning for all your stakeholders. They're positioning in the world. They're positioning for your suppliers and partners. They're positioning for your customer, the reasons to buy. Not only do you have a great product, but you've also produced it sustainable, and you've also added things to it that make it attractive to the customer because you have goodwill or because you create good value. And then you also have corporate values that are important for employees of your company. That's why they choose to come and work for you. That's why they work that much harder for you. Now, what do corporate values do within a company? Now, if you look at this picture, they do actually a lot. They actually show your level of responsibility in the world. They create trust, because if you say you work for excellence, or if you work in a field that needs high safety measures, then actually your values show how seriously you take the safety, or how seriously you take your quality, or how seriously you take morality, how reliable you are, how much you can actually work with people and make sure that whatever you offer actually also happens. So there's a lot of guidance, a lot of direction in your corporate values. They are a motivator for your people to work on, they are a focus also for their actions, and they are always a moral compass. So it's actually very important for people to know what their corporate values are, even if they're actually having their own business. Now, different cultures have different viewpoints. So what the one sees as the one thing, the other sees as the other thing. And with cultures, that's often a really hard discussion, because people really do see things their own way. Now, if you go and work with corporate values, that is even a bigger problem or a bigger challenge, because with corporate values, people don't often understand the words you use, or they don't understand them in the same way that you meant them. And even with an explanation about what the value means, you can still have people confused because they just look at things in a very different way. Now, if you look, we have now put some ideas together from different cultural theories to show you exactly how to adjust the communication about your corporate values, or sometimes even how to adjust the words in your corporate values to a cross-cultural audience. Now, the most important thing in this subject to consider is that some cultures are focused on the individual and some cultures are focused on the group. So normally, mostly Western cultures, that is Northern European cultures in America, the US, they are actually focused on the individual. About 40% of the cultures in the world are mostly focused on the individual and not on group consciousness. So 60% are focused first on we and then on I. Why is that so important? Because it actually determines their drivers. Why would people be focused more on the group than on the individual? It's often because they depend on the group. You often see that countries that are richer are focused more on individual development, and countries that are still poorer or catching on, growing and developing, are actually still very dependent on their group for security, for safety, for survival. Now, if you look at different values in that, if you look at people that are involved, you can see on the left side, we have, with the involvement on the left side, we have the individual cultures that are generally neutral. They are professional, but they're not very involved in an emotional manner in business, while the group cultures are involved far more emotionally in business. So if you lead a group with an emotional inclination, then it's very important to get them together, to coach them, to make them into a team, to make them happy together, to work together. While it's not the professional goal that is so important, it's more actually the feeling of togetherness that is very important. Now, the second one is communication. In an individual surrounding or in individual cultures, generally communication is quite straightforward. It's actually quick and it's clear. But in most cultures, so in the group cultures in this world, they don't like direct communication. They would like it to be a bit more unclear in the sense that people don't get attacked. The direct communication might be loss of face. And people don't like that in group cultures because they want everybody to be comfortable. Now, if you look at perception of time in our individual cultures, so in our Western, Northern European and US cultures, or if you are actually raised or you're trained in such an environment and a way of thinking, you tend to look at time as past, present, and future in a sequence. Now, people that are from a group culture often look at time in a very different way. It's not about being on time or being too late, but being on time actually has a lot to do with all kinds of stuff that happens around what they're doing. So they are either on time or too late, but it's not about the point of arriving. It's more about whatever happens before you arrive. So the time concept is completely different. And that often for Westerners is a very hard thing to understand because they say, well, 12 o'clock is 12 o'clock. What's the hard thing about that? But there's a totally different perception behind in group cultures behind time. Now, another thing is responsibility. In our Western cultures, the individual can take a certain amount of responsibility. So when you, for instance, have a value like accountability, when you are an individual and you can take responsibility, that's all accepted and expected by a Western culture. But in an Eastern culture or in an African culture or in a South American culture, the boss often in the end takes most or all of the responsibility. And you cannot counter the boss. That's actually the next value you see, hierarchy and status. The boss is so elevated above the rest of the group that you actually cannot counter that person. So you cannot suggest other ideas. You cannot say something went wrong because the boss didn't see it in the correct manner. So these are things that actually are very different in cultures. And when it comes to accountability, when it comes to quality, when it comes to excellence, these are very important values to understand, or very important differences to understand. Now, there's another thing that is very different from individual and group cultures. That is the measure or the amount of control. Now, the individual cultures believe generally that we have internal control, that a lot of things are under our control. Not everything, but we are actually shocked when it's not, when we cannot move it, when we cannot control something. In in a group culture, they believe that there is a lot of external direction. There's a lot of things outside of themselves that control their lives. So they also let go of having to control life. If you, for instance, look at the Netherlands, we have controlled water for a long time. We've built dikes and we created land because we could control water. So more and more we believe that everything can happen and everything can be controlled. While in other cultures, very quickly they give the control to a god or to nature or to other elements than themselves. And when you look at everything can be as a value, everything can happen, we can achieve the highest, then the level of control that people feel in a group setting is different from the level of control that people feel in an individual culture. So if we look at examples of corporate values, we see here an example of very nice and common values that we would see in a lot of companies. So we look at respect and integrity, at passion, ownership, a work-life balance, and excellence. And of course, when you look at values like that, the company will have an explanation about exactly what they mean by these different ideas. But there are differences between actually having a Western group promoting these ideas, or even having an Eastern group promoting these ideas. There is a difference in perception and understanding of these ideas. Now, on what level, on which element would there be a difference? Now, for instance, take ownership. Again, do we take ownership as individuals? Do we take ownership as a group? Or is the boss the one who takes ownership? So if you say to an African person that you work with or to a South American person that you work with that they have to take ownership, they would not do it because it's offensive to the boss. So it's actually much harder, and it takes some time to explain ownership to somebody who works or who lives in and who is from a group culture. Now, if you look at, for instance, work-life balance, in most of the group cultures, people work after hours. People go to restaurants and bars and are still working. People go and work in weekends. They actually take life and take opportunity when it happens. While in Western societies, generally, people stop work at 5. They work from 9 to 5 or from 8 to 4, and then they leave. Then they go and do something else, and it's unthinkable, or it's actually uncalled for when you call people at night or in the weekend to ask them a work-related question. So also that is very different in different cultures. Excellence, again, who's going to create the excellence? So is that going to be the boss? Or is every individual responsible for part of that excellence? Now, if you look at H&M, for instance, they have 7 values, and some of them are actually great for individual groups and team groups, but some are not. If you look at straightforwardness and open-mindedness, that again will cause a problem for group cultures, because generally they are not direct, they're indirect. So how can you be straightforward? And who are you gonna harm? Whose loss of face you're gonna create when you are straightforward? And also hierarchy and status. Who are you when you're not in the highest ranks to actually have comments, to have ideas, or to have an open mind and share that? So these can be things when you actually promote this in a environment that is group a group culture, then you have to really make clear what you mean by straightforwardness and open-mindedness, and you have to train people to become more like that. They can, but it's not a natural inclination to do so. Now, if you look at Starbucks, again, they have values that some of them are wonderful in other countries, in countries that are actually more group focused. And I've been in many countries in the world that are group focused, where you see Starbucks and it seems to sort of all look the same and work the same. So obviously it works. Creating a culture of warmth and belonging where everybody is welcome is absolutely a value that both group and individual cultures can work with. Acting with courage, challenging the status quo, and, excuse me, yeah, challenging the status quo and each other. Now that's already a problem, challenging each other. That's already for instance, Asian cultures that go into group behavior and don't want anybody to lose face, then challenging each other is a problem. Going and looking at being present, connected with transparency and dignity and respect. If you connect with transparency, again, direct and indirect communication. So are you actually being transparent, and can you still make sure nobody loses face, nobody feels attacked, nobody feels confronted, which is a no-no in group cultures generally. So this indirect communication is sometimes, for these values that are very Western based, a big and an important challenge. Now, if you look at neutral and emotional, then you also see when there's leadership with implementing these values, leaders that come from the West are often very professional, are often focused on results and are often focused on goals, but not necessarily on getting people to work together and to go for it. And in a group culture, they are far more emotionally based. So they need that encouragement, they need that push. Now, if you look at Google, now they've got very interesting values, and I really don't know what to do with value 6, which is do not be evil. Now that actually, whatever culture you go into, you would get into major trouble explaining what it is not to be evil. So I don't think that's a value that works at all. Now, it's not just the values, it's also the imagery that is very important when you communicate corporate values, because it can actually support your corporate values, but it can also tear your corporate values down. Now, if you look at the left-hand side, the sign for positivity is actually in Brazil an extremely rude sign, and it's also extremely rude in Turkey. So when you use these kinds of symbols and you are going to go and work with your company in Brazil or in Turkey, find out first what you're actually communicating, because this could actually create major problems. Now, honesty with a hand like that, even for us, it's stop. It's not honesty. So actually, when you communicate, be sure that all over the world, your symbol means the same thing, or at least is positive. Now, if you look at the values on the right-hand side, the care, the spread hand, again, is extremely rude in Greece. So it's actually not a good idea when you work internationally to use all these different symbols and not know what they mean. So that is something that you really have to look into next to the words you use. Now, the imagery of smileys also, for instance, in Asia, smiling is often hiding hiding shame or hiding something that is difficult. So it's hard to actually use smileys and use them in the correct way. So again, check when you use a smiley, what you're doing and how it actually is perceived by the other side. And if you work with a culture in Asia, for instance, when people say, yeah, it's okay, it's nice, then make sure you know and you ask indirectly if it is okay. Now, if you look at the smiley on the right side, make it fun. A wink, again, in Asia, doesn't necessarily mean it's a nice idea. We think a wink is sort of cheeky, but nothing else. But it's actually not very trustworthy in most Asian cultures. So again, not a good idea unless you know what you do and what countries that you're going to take your values into. Now, of course, there are other corporate values or other imagery that is really good. Like here, there are a few examples of imagery that does work and that is okay. And most of it is okay. It's just important that you really check it, because sometimes you really miss a lot of cooperation when you don't know what the symbols actually mean, or people are laughing about it and you don't know why. Now, we have our next seminar on the 24th and next webinar on the 21st century skills on May 7th. And you can go to our website to actually look at that seminar or that webinar. And now I would like to open for questions. So please let us know. You can either raise a hand or you can actually type your question, and then we'll answer it or ask you to ask it again in direct way. So please, we're open to questions. Yes, I will ask Sushil Prasad. Please talk to us. Tell us what your question is.
Yeah, well, good evening to you all. My question really was related to the fact that, yes, while the broader parameters of these cultural nuances could apply to a set of people,
yes,
there is within that set of people, I mean, there are people who don't necessarily adhere to the norms of that given region or country or whatever. So one also needs to be, I mean, at least get a perception of where the individual stands vis-a-vis the kind of image that we might have for a particular culture.
Sorry, you have to, because you're hard to hear. So please, can you ask me again? What's your specific question?
Well, the specific question was that while there could be a broader brush applied to given countries and regions, I mean, that they adhere to certain cultural norms, but there are always exceptions to the rule, right? So, I mean,
of course.
Yeah, so I mean, in the interactions with an individual belonging to a particular region or country, etc., one also should be sensitive to how that particular person that one might be interacting with, how he or she is oriented.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Next to looking at culture, because that's actually generalizing, and that's very right that you're saying that. There's also personality. And generally, this is of course a short webinar, but generally we look at more different things. This is just a generalization of these ideas, just to give you a taste of what can happen when you use corporate values in different countries. But yes, if you go one-on-one, you talk one-on-one with people of different cultures, of course, personality and many other things are also a part of the equation.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, there's a question. How does, Tabitha van den Berg, how does a difference in understanding cultural values cause conflict, and how to best avoid it in your opinion? Now that's of course a very a general question, Tabitha, but it's very important to see that if you do not understand cultural values, that you do not understand, or the differences in cultural values, that you do not understand reactions. So what causes conflict is either that you don't understand people and that they know you don't understand, but as a foreign company, you come in and you act as if you do. You act as if you know better, or you lay down the law. So that's part of why it's important to understand differences. It's also important when you come in as a foreign company in a country that you actually respect and take time to get to know the culture. So often in most cultures, when you do that, you will create interaction, you will start creating communication. More than trying to avoid conflict, you actually can learn how to not have it. Trying to avoid it in a way is still not interacting, and the interacting actually helps to learn and grow, because you do it both ways. You can actually also, people can also offend you, and telling each other in the end in a very mild and kind way is the way to solve this. Okay, Bauke Rodeberg. Signals of Western companies that is difficult for group cultures. Yes, signals of Western cultures that are, of Western companies that are difficult for group cultures. But can you share examples of signals of group cultures that are difficult to understand for people from individual cultures as well? Not necessarily hand signals. Yes, there are several signals, but we would have to show them. But for instance, there are some in Asian cultures, and in many Asian countries where I go, they have a saying, and that is, it's on the way. So what they say is something is somewhere along the road from where it's supposed to be to where you are. And in a Western culture, it's very hard to understand that somebody cannot depict where something is exactly. So when they say, the parcel is on the way, we would like to know, where is it? How long will it take before it gets to me? And in an Eastern culture, often they say it's on the way, but it could be days or minutes. We don't know. And that for us is, for instance, an example of something that is hard for our culture. Do you have an example of a company that has great international corporate values? Yes. Amex, for instance, American Express has great international corporate values, in the sense that they are not in any way disruptive for any culture. And they actually, yes, they serve everybody. Everybody generally understands, because also it's a very service-based company. They generally understands what the company is doing and what it's aiming for. Lina Robayo, would you like to ask us a question?
Yes.
Hello, Lina. Yes.
Very much. Hi. Hello. Can you
Hi.
hear me? I was wondering if, for instance, in this international context, do you suggest to have a limited or a small number of corporate values? Because for most of the examples you showed, and also in my company and other companies, you see that you have 9 different corporate values. And to some extent, it doesn't feel like they stick that much, this large amount of numbers. So do you have a tip on that, or any ideas?
Yes, generally it's my experience, and I've worked quite a bit with companies on their corporate values. 4 to 5 will stick. It's true, when there's many, nobody knows what to focus on anymore. 3 is not enough. 4 to 5 is actually okay, and it should actually also refer to different areas of what the company is doing. And depending on the company, some companies focus very much on safety, some companies focus very much on service. So of course they should be geared towards the area, towards the industry. But then, 4 or 5 different things that a company is actually providing, there should be a value connected to that.
Super.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. First of all, thank you very much for the talk. You're welcome. What is the best practice regarding determining the degree to which a company should adapt itself to a local culture? Because a company should also have values that do not change every time it has a new location. No. I'm not actually saying change your values. I'm saying change your communication. If you are actually intending to work internationally, you should have values that are not conflicting for a big part of the world, but it's often about the communication and sometimes also about the visuals. You could even help companies or help cultures, help employees in other countries by adjusting words. So not the main word of the value, but adjusting the description of the value so that they understand better. But it's not about changing your values everywhere, because then in the end you have all values or nothing, so that doesn't work. How should we avoid conflict, or how do we learn to deal with it? I'm not sure if you should avoid conflict, because then you're still focused on it. How do you deal with it? First of all, know that you don't know everything. Neither does the other person that actually you've created or that you feel you have a conflict with. So once you admit, and that's what I've seen with a lot of foreign cultures, well, I'm from the Netherlands, so everything outside of Europe, when you say, listen, I don't know everything, but I would like to learn, and I would like to understand how you feel or how you perceive, that's often a good beginning to changing the challenge that you have with other cultures. What is the role of local agents in addressing different values and behaviors? Local agents can help you quite a bit. Local agents are often either agents from the country, or they are agents that actually know the country very well. So they can explain this to you. So depending on where you come from, this is from Luana. Depending on where you come from, Luana, it's often important to create a good relationship with your local agents so that they start trusting more to you and telling you more things that are a bit more sensitive. So that's how you learn. Okay, now we would like to have the last question for this session. Wouter Pastoor, would you like to ask a question? Hello, Wouter? Hello? I can hear something. Hello, Wouter? We have to find somebody else there. Okay, thank you for all the questions that you have. We will answer them. We will come back to you with the answers. Thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you will be motivated to learn more. Thank you.